Okay, welcome to Portfolio 4. This is the UVing and baking lecture here within Maya inside Substance Painter. Please make sure that you are baking inside Substance Painter and not Maya. I cannot stress that enough, and we still getting students who are doing that. But I've kind of broken down this lecture with my drill here in my Maya scene. I've got a couple of different things duplicated here, so try not to get too confused by things. But I will do some test bakes for you just to show you the benefits of floating geometry and how that bakes as well, how you need to name things, some UV techniques that I use to help me out. Um, and the baking techniques that I use inside Substance Painter to actually get effective and quick bakes that are showing me quick results so that I know what I'm doing, and then working my way up around. Maybe even showing you some techniques for masking out some baking errors in your model right there inside Substance Painter as well. So we'll be going through some of these techniques here. I have my high res model. You guys can probably see, those floating geometry pieces right there. That's that stuff. Yeah, a little nasty, but this is the area that we're going to be baking for this lecture video, and I have a few examples for actual skirting geometry here. But this lecture is really here for revision. There were a few techniques in the old video that were incorrect, but we're laying this stuff out here right now. The essential part of getting your game res modeled out, I just want to stress this too, is to affect the silhouette of your model. All right. If there are features of your model that aren't affecting your silhouette, like let's say for instance, for me, I had baked this whole area, this depression in to this flat area. That probably was an incorrect technique because it has so much depth to it. It probably would have been a better feature to actually have modeled in there. But a lot of these smaller features, there's no way that I'm ever going to see the silhouette of those screws going into the side there. So that's definitely an area where I definitely wanted to bake these features in with normal maps and just rely on that instead of using the game res. And feel free to go to my game res. I do have an example game res once again in the milestone activity. And please look through the student gallery as well. I cannot stress that enough too, that you look through the student gallery, see how other students have successfully laid out a game res, and it also gives you a good estimate as to how much geometry you should be using for a feature and how much geometry is a bit excessive. Um, Feel free to bevel your model if you would like, but I only encourage you to use chamfers. So a face like this would probably be a good area for me to apply a chamfer to. Bevel the edge with just one little face there, and then that would be a good chamfer for a game res model. Uh, and you can adjust the fractions of these, like I said before, using your pie chart and kind of sliding that around. Holding control also gives you a smoother control feature for that. Um, but working on the game res, we're going to be focusing on keeping that silhouette nice and strong, staying away from any faceting. Maybe this seems like maybe a little bit too low for that kind of feature there. Definitely really low for this area right here too. So, keep an eye out for faceting. Turn your lights on in the scene. Take a look at your silhouette. You can clearly see where we're falling short on actually getting a good smooth silhouette on the model. But this game res model should not be smoothed. Your high res is the only thing that should be smoothed. Okay, so do please keep that in mind, and keep in mind the difference between hardening and softened edges. That often is a confusing thing. Hardened edges are these edges right here, where we're seeing this hardened surface right there. That is a hardened edge. This is really only used for really intense geometry. If I soften this entire model, you can see how hard this geometry is working to try to round that out, and we're getting these shading errors right there. That's bad information. I would encourage you to go for a bevel as opposed to using a hard edge to navigate that. So this is obviously a hard edge here right now, and now we see that the shading is correct. But this hard edge is going to be hard for us to visualize, and it's going to create that detail in there. Um, so, I mean, we would rather you select these edges and create that bevel there And now that I soften my edge, you'll see that we're getting a much nicer visual from that alone right there, and the normals are softening things out for us. So that's the approach we do want to try to go for there. But your entire model should actually be softened. Only hardening the areas where you're actually getting baking errors like this right here. Okay. Uh, if I harden these edges right there, you can see how it's starting to fix that shading error back there by hardening that edge. That's where hardening edges is actually useful, but keep in mind that all hardened edges have to be a UV seam for it to work correctly as well. So if you are using hardened edges, you have to make that a UV seam for that specific edge, or it's not going to work right. Using hardened edges to try to get like a crisp look to your model is not the correct way for using hard edges. Okay, that is where you want to use your high-res model to effectively put holding edges on your model and crisp that area out to physically get that effect on the high-res. This is going to bake into the normals and give us that presentation that we're looking for on the high res and give us a nice smooth thing. If we use hard edges to try to get that effect, we're essentially utilizing only the geometry there, and it's going to be a very faceted effect. It's not going to look right. It is not the correct technique that we want to use for getting actual hard edges on the model that are visually there. Okay, so my advice to you is smooth out the entire or soften out the entire model, and only harden areas where you're seeing some smoothing errors, some softening errors on your model, like these shadows here. Okay. The next thing I want to show you is, we're really just focusing on geometry for right now. We'll move on to UVs here in a minute. I'm going to show you some techniques for resetting your normals and fixing any errors that you might be getting from that. So I'm going to use a tool that I use here called Vertex Normal. I'll show you that in a minute here. But you may be getting geometry like this, or you may have a face that's been reversed. So let's put on some back face calling here so we can, or actually it is on, there. So now I have a back face on my model and I have a vertice that's been funked up there. So, to get rid of a feature like this, you obviously have the wrong side face. You can turn your back face calling on and off. So you may be able to see through the model, but turning your back face calling turning it on, you'll be able to see through the model. Turning it off, you'll be able to see these black faces and see that that is, in fact, a opposite-sided face. And make sure that you're modeling with a blend when you're using these features. Once again, because you should be able to see what these features are doing to your geometry there. To get rid of any faces like this, pretty easy to do. Come over to mesh display and you can actually hit conform, and it'll find all those faces that are not facing the right direction and conform it to you. Now you also see that it hardened all my edges there too, so I will probably have to harden all my edges again, or soften those edges again, but I'm going to try to take care of this guy right here. There is the Vertex Edit Normal tool. If you come over to Mesh Display, you have the Vertex Normal Edit tool where you can physically grab vertices and move them around. But this is not something you want to try to eyeball, right? That's a little messy and hard to do. But this may be a good feature for you to utilize if you're using cards and you're doing foliage and you need your normals to flay out so you're capturing more light from different directions. That's something you probably want to take care of, because if you're softening your geometry, it may not create the right effect for you, but getting lighting around a card is pretty useful to flay out your normals like that. But I'm going to do what I call a normal reset, and what I do here is I grab my face, I come over to mesh display, and what I'm going to grab is set to face here. What this tool does is it finds the vertex, the normal direction of each face, and it sets all my vertices to that face normal. So that's what it's doing right there, is it's setting all of my vertex normals to my face normal. Essentially what I'm getting here is my basic geometry straight out of the create tool, basically. If this thing was made out of a cube, that's what I would be getting right there, is basic cube normals. So now that I've done that, I can actually come over here and soften the edges. And then we're actually, sorry, let me grab it right here. soften all my edges, and now I've corrected all those features that have been disheveled there. um, so that's the normal reset. I encourage you to try that out. I really would try to work on these things like right before you start exporting your model. That's probably a good time for you to start playing around with this stuff, because you may be modeling something over here, but normals can get messed up between saves and stuff like that too. So Maya can mess up your normals as you're modeling. So this is probably one of your last stage features that you want to take care of. Okay. So that's the normal reset. Do make sure that you're using the cleanup tool. Um, mesh cleanup. You're going to want to look through your options here and see what you're actually cleaning up. I encourage you to actually only select the matching polygons and not allow it to do it for you. Look for any n-gons, faces with more than 4 sides. Concave faces are usually not that great. Faces with holes. Non-planar is a little bit unavoidable, but that may give you an area where you may want to select those faces and triangulate those manually. I don't really encourage students to triangulate their whole models because that may be a little destructive. But if you grab your non-planar faces, that may give you, and the non-manifold faces, then may give you a good idea of where you may want to put some triangles on your model. Grabbing lamina faces is a good one too. That's faces that are sharing all edges. It's just faces on top of faces. That's a bad feature. Also selecting some of these features here where you maybe you extruded part of your edge and it only went a certain amount of space. It'll be able to find those edges and say, hey, you extruded this 50 times here. These edges have this small amount of space. Are you really using that space? That may give you an indicator on where you may have some problem geometry. All right, so grab some of that stuff there. It obviously found these faces up here. What I like to do also is just grab isolate, and now I have isolated faces, and I can see where all my problems are. Hey, look at all those n-gons! Yay! These faces right here, you can clearly see how it's trying to triangulate my model. It's very confused by which way it's supposed to go. That's probably an area I want to manually triangulate before I move on with my model. I also, oh, look at that. I chamfered a vertice. How lovely. So that's some stuff that you can use to clean up and really find some bad stuff that you may not recognize at first. All right. So delete all your history. Make sure that you're naming your features correctly. Okay. I'm going to give you a strategy here. Not everything has to be named individually in your model. You obviously want your match by name feature to be working correctly for Substance Painter, so it's baking one thing onto itself, but you don't have to name everything individually. For instance, if I combine this shape with this shape and name this drill part 1, I have this middle sector here that's not part of that selection. So if I'm actually getting baking errors from those two onto each other, I have some problems. But they're so far apart from each other that I don't have to name those or separate those from each other. I can actually combine my model into maybe like 3 or 4 whole pieces, as long as those pieces are separated from each other and name the same thing between the high res and the game res. You may be able to optimize your work here. Let's say, for instance, I'm modeling a chain, like a chain, or something that's really long and duplicated over and over again. I may be able to grab like every 3 chains, every 3 links, and make that one whole chain link selection instead of naming my stuff chain 1 to 50. Right? That would take a lot of time. Also, you have to keep in mind that your model needs to have an extension to it, an underscore, right? I don't know how that happened, but this is front, underscore high. You have to have the underscore high and underscore low in there. So you do have some batch rename features inside Maya, but they actually don't have the extension available to them. Because if I do a batch rename on a bunch of pieces, it's going to put a number at the end of it, not an extension. So that number is going to show up and not the extension at the back, which is going to be a problem. So there are some scripting features out there that'll help you out, but I think if you strategize your work enough, you won't have to deal with those massive number of renames. You may be able to just grab every three chain links and have one model selected for that whole area. Take a look at your outliner, see what things are. Obviously this model is not named correctly, but you will want to ungroup your work. What I like to do is just grab my entire model and Shift P. That should Shift P and focus back in. That should be able to give you the feature that you're looking for there. Uh, it should be able to ungroup all of your models from being inside groups. Okay. Um, you actually want to focus and use more of your layers over here instead of groups, because then you could turn the visibility on and off on your layers and actually even set up reference nodes where you can't physically select that area, but you have it as a reference for when you're setting up your game res. Okay, so use your layers like this, not groups. Grouping can affect your naming convention when you export. So if you see that some pieces of your model are not baking in your substance painter, you may be able to you may have some groups in there that may be changing the name of your work, and then it doesn't recognize where it's coming from, and it doesn't bake those features in there. So you will have to hold Shift P, unparent your work, make sure it's all named correctly, go through all of these different checkpoints to make sure that you're getting correct bakes and your model set up for baking. I'm gonna close my outliner here. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers the actual modeling portion for the game res pieces there. So, using your cleanup and looking through those features is pretty ideal and pretty interesting and definitely important. Delete your history once again. I have definitely set up a shelf that has all these features in there. That's definitely going to be helpful for you to get some quick things in there. Delete history, center pivot, freeze transform. All those things are really good to have on the fly there. So I'm going to come over to actually UVing now, and we'll see what's going on here. I'm going to turn off my high res so I'm not getting all this stuff in here. Uh, okay, so actually UVing my model. Open up my UV editor here. We have this UV toolkit here. It's a little new for some of the newer versions, but it has a lot of interesting features that you're going to want to take advantage of. Now, I'm okay if you want to use automatic UV tool, but you have to assemble that stuff afterwards. You cannot just leave it that way. Most features inside Maya are not one hit and you're good to go. You have to do cleanup for most of the operations you do inside Maya. That's just a way of life you have to get used to now. But uh, when you're using automatic UVs, you will have to assemble some pieces together. Try to stay away from UV seams that have like if this thing got UV'd and it had like this stepped effect in the middle of the model where we're getting these stairs, that's a bad UV seam, and you want to replace that and switch it up for something that's a little bit cleaner, like some of the like an edge loop like this right here. That would be a cleaner edge seam that would be less easier or less visible when you're actually looking at the model. Okay. Um, and don't worry about placing too many UV seams. You do want UV seams on this model. You want this unfolding correctly. Okay. Uh, do not worry about UV seams when you're working in Substance Painter, though, because we have features now like triplanar projection inside of Substance Painter where we're actually overriding and overloading what the UV seams are doing, and we're not looking at it like a 2D image, we're projecting on from a 3D view. So we can override what UV seams are actually there using those kind of features. And we'll learn about that next week when we actually get into Substance Painter past the baking side of things. But try to get some UV seams in there and strategize where you want to unfold this. Now, obviously, this model has some pretty difficult pieces to understand. It's just like, where do I even start with something like this? Me personally, I don't like using the automatic UVs. I like to kind of learn while I'm modeling, learn while I'm UVing. There's usually a better way to go about things sometimes. So I am a personal fan of using the camera-based UV. So you can grab your faces and use camera-based. And what this will do is actually project, whoops, Substance Painter, bring you down real quick. So you see here what I did. I took these faces right here and I used my camera-based projection. You have it over there in the UV editor right there. And what this does is it projects based off of what the camera is physically seeing. So I'm going to take my shape over here, make sure that I can see both the front and the back of it like this. Okay, so now that I have that shape figured out, I can come through here and grab my edge loops and start planning out my seams. Once I have my seams selected, I can separate my model into pieces, pull my other piece off, and start and do another camera projection for other pieces, and just kind of build up on those camera projections. Um, Obviously, right now I don't want to be doing all that work for you just to conserve time for you. Uh, but this is ultimately what I got. I was able to assemble some of my seams back together after I projected from different views. I assembled some of them back together to avoid some UV seams in certain areas. Here's a good look of what my UVs look like actually. Try to make sure that you're using and you're observing your textile density. Make sure that you have a good uniform scale to your UVs. That I'm a little bit larger on this shape than I am on this shape. This is what the layout tool is for, by the way, and we'll go over that here in a minute. But just try to take a look at your UVs, see how far they're stretching, and see what kind of information you're getting from that. There are a few techniques for unfolding my UVs that I want to make sure are clear to you. Uh, so first off, the unfold tool itself does a pretty good job nowadays. You see what it did right there. Pretty nice unfold. However, you may be getting some features in there that may not be good for you. Or obviously this model's been unfolded before a little bit. But you may have some really messy geometry that may not unfold the right way. And that's when you want to actually go for the smooth UVs. So I'm going to show you, actually let me do that again real quick. Unfold a shape, excuse me. So this tool is no longer in the shift options, which is a bummer. But smooth UV is this tool right here in the tools, smooth UV. And this gives me an option to actually unfold my model with a slider and relax it. So I can relax my model and unfold it and kind of relax it and unfold it. Relaxing kind of pinches everything together, but it gets the right shape going for you. So you may need to go through some of these features where you relax and unfold things off and on just to get it to go the right way that you want it to go. If you have something like a curling helix tool or something that's really crazy, you may want to relax it so it kind of lays out flat, and then you kind of unfold it so that it kind of loosens up afterwards. So that's a good, the relax tool is actually a good feature for kind of unwinding things and unfolding it and kind of allowing you to relax it out later on with the unfold tool. So there's some good features for that there. There's also the unitize tool, which you've probably already learned. With unitize, if I'm dealing with something that's very long and rectangular, maybe a tiling feature, that would be a great feature for helix as well. Let me grab a helix actually and see what we can get with from this. So there's my helix. Pretty bad UVs there. But let me just grab my faces here and see how fast we can do this. Do a camera projection. Hey, look at that. That's really nasty. I can grab all of my faces and unitize, or my UVs, sorry. Grab my UVs. Unitize my shape. Where's it at? There it is. There we go. Now everything's a box. That's even better, right? Super. And now my computer's lagging because it doesn't know what to do. Yeah, it's fun. It's okay. It's probably these end guns at the end here. Let's just get rid of those. You have no place here. All right. So from here, what I want to do is actually grab my UV seams that I want to have, right? So let's say I want a UV and grab these faces right here because those are the UVs that I want. So now that I have those UVs selected, I'm going to hold shift and then select everything else but those UV seams. And now what I can do is move and sew. And there we go. I've got my two coils kind of set up here, right? Wizardry, right? I did my unfold here. There we go. That's a little bit more in detail there. But if I needed if I needed tiling features, that's how I'm getting them right there. Tile it up. Okay, a quick little unitize can get things going, and maybe get you in the right direction for stuff like that. So hopefully I'm saving you guys time with that kind of stuff, right? uh, okay, coming back to this shape up here. Okay, so something else we need to keep in mind is the layout is actually um, the next thing we need to keep in mind is the textile density, right? We want everything to be uniformly scaled in our UVs. How I would do that is actually using the layout tool. Okay. Now this isn't, like I said, this is not a end product though. Okay, the layout tool has some defects, but it does have a good uniform layout tool, which actually scales everything to the right place. And oftentimes I never settle for what the layout tool gives me. I just allow it to scale everything in my scene to the right thing that's going for it. So actually I'm going to grab all my game res stuff here. Select everything. Come over to shift right click, layout UV. Go to my options. You can use the Unfold 3D or you can use Legacy. They both have this feature. But what we want to grab is the Scale Mode Uniform down here at the bottom. Just making sure that that happens. Probably want to take away from shell pre-rotation. I'll tell you about that in a minute here. We want to stay away from rotating too much unless it's a 90-degree rotation. But we can use that feature for right there. If we come over to Legacy, just in case that one's not working, you can go to Pre-Scale and Scale Mode Uniform right here. Should give you what you want to go for. Now you notice here that the layout tool does not take advantage of filling holes. Oh boo. You got to fill those holes for yourself there. What I like to do personally is when I get my layout, obviously all of these are uniform scale now though. That's what we wanted to get out of this. Now all of my UVs have that uniform scale. If I place a texture on my model here, it's going to have the same resolution on the entire thing. So if I'm putting a whole grunge on my entire model, then that's going to work out perfectly because I'm going to have the same resolution all over the place. So that's going to be great. But what I like to do is actually push my model off here to the right, and then I just start moving my model in one by one and try to strategize how I could fit this thing all together in one space. You can kind of pull some things in here. I usually like to listen to my Tetris music while I'm doing this. It's pretty fun. Just kind of put that on loop, and then, you want to hurt somebody at the end of it. But UVs can be fun, right, kids? So I like to pile all my stuff into a smaller space if I can, like maybe I'll try to squeeze everything into the 0.8 space right here. When I'm done squeezing everything into a tighter space like that, what I can do is I can hold my pivot, lock it in over here, and then just scale it up so that I actually squeeze it into that tighter space, and now I'm using all of my UVs. Okay. If you are modeling, you are allowed to use overlapping if you want to. You can't. Well, you can't have overlapping. You're reusing your textures, right? So if I had this shape right here and I had it overlaid on this one, if I wanted to use the same texture for this one as I am on this one right here, let's just use this as an instance. You don't want to have it like this because that's going to give you a baking error. When you're baking your models inside Substance Painter, it's baking everything into 0 to 1 space. Okay, what you want to use this feature for, or how you want to do this, is actually offsetting your model a whole space. So I'm going to come over here to transform and set some things up. By default, your move tool may be set up to 0.1 instead of 1. So if I move my model around, it moves around in tenths, which is not good. But if you do set this over to 1, I can actually use the arrow keys on my keyboard and press left, and it moves over one whole space. Now it's lined up to my texture, so this is going to receive the same information that I'm receiving over here. Okay. Keep in mind how much you're optimizing this, though. Are you really optimizing your model by saving the UVs of a few little tiny screws, or do you usually have some empty UV space that you can use that stuff for? The latter is usually the case. You usually have a lot of UV space to take care of things. We prefer, especially for portfolio pieces, to have some kind of asymmetry and actually have some good details on the whole model. Um, you really don't have to take advantage of doing this feature too much. Unless you're in a time bind and you really have to duplicate things over and over again. That's really all that I see things going for. But most of your work in Substance Painter is very procedural, and you can actually grab things by UV shells inside Substance Painter and get some really quick selection tools where you can select things, slap something on there, it projects all these details on there, and things are looking good. Okay, so that's UVing and mirroring things over. But once again, try to utilize as much UV space as you can. Another feature for you to keep in mind, if any of you are modeling something that has a long feature in it, like a sword. If you're modeling a sword and you have a long blade right there, that's probably going to be one UV shell, right? One really long UV shell. If I use my layout tool and get uniform scale on that, my blade's going to be all up in here, and all of my other stuff's going to be little tiny. That's going to be a mess, right? So how we avoid that kind of thing is by taking your blade and cutting it in half. If I do something like that, where if I take, let's say for instance this is my blade right here, and I cut this guy in half, what I'm allowing this shape to do is actually, when I use my layout tool, it'll allow me to keep everything at a uniform scale and actually give it some good resolution too. So by all means, put UV seams where you can actually split things in pieces, because setting the scale for that entire model is really going to mess up the whole layout of your UVs there. So try to split things in pieces for that. Another thing you want to keep in mind too is text anti-aliasing is what I should say. There, anti-aliasing. Many of you are going to have features like you've seen this model on Sketchfab where I have all of my font on my plaque over here, right? All the kind of printed on font. Most font and features like that have an up and down or left and right direction to them, right? You have to take advantage of that kind of stuff by making sure that your UVs are lined up to receive that kind of resolution texture. Like you've seen that this model right here has a diagonal grid to it that's kind of left and right, a little diamond shape, right? Diamonds are squares that are turned on its side, right? So if I wanted to take advantage of getting the full resolution of that grid, I can actually take my handle here and spin it to a 45-degree angle so that when I'm actually getting my diamond grid, I'm actually getting the full resolution out of my pixels that are all lined up for that feature there. You can see here when I turn my thing on here, my UVs in the background, my straight details, you can see it right here in the image. My straight details have a very straight and crisp projection on them, and they're using the pixels very wisely. All of my curved and diagonal features do not use my pixels. You see how it's stepping? That's called aliasing. So the more you keep your UVs straight up and down and left and right to the details that you need them to be, the better resolution you're going to get out of your textures, and you're going to get less. You're going to have to use anti-aliasing a lot less. Also, compression settings are also going to take better care of your model for some of your straight up and down features. Okay, so keep that stuff in mind when you're UVing your model. For this case, it doesn't benefit me too much to rotate that whole shape out just for that little tiny grid. But if you had that grid separated for some reason, that would be a good feature for you to take care of as well. In regards to separating pieces as well, take advantage of faces that you are not seeing. Okay. So obviously this model is separate pieces here. If I grab this, it's a separate piece. But looking at my model here, you'll see how I actually added an extra edge loop in here just to delete edges, to delete faces on the inside. These are all faces that are never going to be seen. Okay, so take advantage of your UVs. I would be fine if you added geometry to delete geometry. if that makes sense to you. You're adding topology to delete UV space. So if you're modeling a pistol that has a hand grip on it, you can actually take that pistol, use a multi-cut tool, and delete some faces behind that handle that are actually going to be occupying UV space that you don't need. That's exactly why we were using that abyss effect for the inside of any gun barrel, because we don't want those long UVs in there. Cut it off short, create a little shadow in there, and then you're kind of saving us a lot of space and time. Um, so try to optimize your model if you can, and delete anything that's not going to be seen. Uh, so let's see there. I think I've projected and UV'd most of my stuff here. Um, and I've gone through most of what I have to say for actually UVing the model. We're gonna bake this feature on in Substance Painter, and I'm only gonna grab this shape, so I'm not gonna bake the entire model. It's gonna save you guys some time for that. But this is my feature here. Using floating geometry with skirting information. This is my game res model. So I'm gonna grab this shape right here and select those two. Uh, Name them the same thing so that they bake onto each other. All floating geometry that does not affect the silhouette of the model should be deleted for the game res. Keep that in mind, okay? So if this was never breaking my silhouette, I would only have this selected, and then that floating geometry would simply just bake on as normal map information. So this would be my game res, and this would be my high res, baking it on there, okay? But for this feature, this actually is affecting my silhouette. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this as my game mesh, and this is my high mesh, okay? Obviously, make sure that they're on top of each other, right? I'm just doing this for demo purposes, but so this would be my high mesh, and the opposite would be my game mesh, okay? Make sure that they're combined together. You want to combine shapes together that are baking onto each other. Make sure that they're named correctly. I'm going to get rid of my UV toolkit here. Make sure they're named correctly. Do not combine your whole shape together, because that loses all your naming conventions, right? What you have to do is grab your entire model, export selected for your game res and your high res, and that'll save all your names there. We're saving as FBXs. We're using smoothing groups because that's our hard and soft edges, right? We are not using smoothing. We're not using smooth mesh because that actually adds topology and smooths my mesh, right? We don't want to use that. Not even for the high res because you smoothed it already in Maya, right? So your model should be smoothed already from your first milestone. We do not want to use tangents and binormals. The reason why we're not using tangents binormals is because we want Substance Painter to make that for us, because that's the program that we're sticking with our textures and our baking. So that's the program that we're actually going to make those features with. If you want to, you can triangulate your model. I just don't encourage it. Okay, so right now I'm going to save my model as an FBX, game res, and high res. I'm just going to skip that for you because I already have those saved. And we're going to jump straight into Substance Painter now. Hopefully I've covered everything. If there is something that is missing, then it will be shown in the annotations at the bottom of the lecture. So now I have my new Substance Painter scene. I'm going to make a new one. PBR Metal Rough, please. Select my game res mesh. Oh boy. Let's find it in my heap of garbage. Okay. No. Where's my demo? There we go. Sorry. Okay, this is my game res mesh, and this is my high res mesh, FBX, right? Game res, grab it. I don't have any cameras or textures, right? You're making those right now. Your document resolution. This is what your visualizer is showing you, okay? This can be edited at any point of your working inside Substance Painter, okay? Not really that necessary. This may be what your document is set to by default, though, when you export, okay? So keep that in mind. Huh? Not really. As long as you change it before you export, really, okay? Just check that. You are working in DirectX. Even though Sketchfab is OpenGL, we want you working at DirectX because Unreal is DirectX, and we want you trained up to actually seeing your normal maps in DirectX. So check that at DirectX. Now the last thing we want to do is compute tangent space per fragment. This is the tangents and binormals that we're making inside Substance Painter just for that program, because Substance Painter, when it exports, it's going to make tangents and binormals for whatever program we're exporting into. Okay, but since we're doing all of our bakes inside Substance Painter, this is where we want the tangents and binormals to be made. Okay, okie dokie. So now I have my model in here. I have my little nub ready to go. So now we are going to start by baking. This second milestone is only you baking your normal map and your high res, your normal map and your AO map from the high res model. That's it. I shouldn't see any wood grain or wear and tear on this model. I really just want to see how you're baking things and how you're correcting things. Do not wait for the last minute to do this, because this does take some time to fix things, correct things, go through some motions there. This is not a last minute step for you by any means. We're going to come over here to my texture. There we go. Sorry. You see here how it's 2048, right? This is only the visual of what I'm looking at. So right now I'm in 1024. Nothing's changed. Most of your details inside Substance Painter are set up so that they can actually increase in resolution with your visualizer. Okay. So even though your textures may not look very good in 1024, you probably are not visualizing it in the right settings. So if you bump it up to 2048, you're going to see the 2048 textures that you have on your model. Okay, it's only giving you a quicker way to move inside of Substance Painter. Okay, so now that I have my texture set on, I'm in 2048 because that's just where I'm going to start off with. I'm going to bake my mesh maps. Do I need to bake all this stuff right now? No. Okay. In fact, you don't have to bake all these maps until you actually start up on week 2, okay? And ID maps, if you're not using ID, you don't even need to bake that, okay? Really, with the UV selection tools that you have inside Substance Painter, the features in there are pretty strong for you, especially with hard surface models, where you don't really even have to have an ID map, okay? But if you want to, you can. There's special techniques for that. I'm not even going to select AO right now because I really just want to see what my normal map's making. I want things to be very fast. I don't want to have to wait for anything. I'm going to go 1024 with my normal map. I'm going to grab my high-res model. Some features for you to keep in mind here. Dilation width, okay? Dilation is how far off the UV shell that we're projecting our textures. So whenever you're looking at your textures and you see that kind of stretching that's happening on the sides there, that's dilation, okay? That keeps you from getting those black lines on your UV seams, right? Because sometimes your UVs can fall just a little bit short of what your textures are actually there for. So having a little bit of dilation there is really important, okay? Setting it to 1 hasn't really had any problems for me, so I think that's a good thing to go for. Diffusion is the background color to your textures, okay? So if I turn this off on my normal map, I'm going to have a black background on everything outside of my UV shells, okay? Once again, probably a good feature to just have blued on, just to be safe with things, okay? So having that turned on is good. This next feature is pretty interesting, actually. It's called use the low poly mesh as the high poly mesh. You don't want to do that for your final by any means, because that's pretty much just plugging your low res mesh into the high res and baking it itself onto itself. But if you are getting any errors from your bakes that you don't know where it's coming from, sometimes it's nice to just turn this on and bake it onto itself. If you're getting errors from those bakes specifically, then you have a problem with your low res mesh. If you're not getting any errors from that, then the problem's probably from your high res mesh. So that's a good little way for you to figure out where the problem is coming from, so you know where to isolate your attention to. Okay? So that feature is good. Don't really need it right now. We did explain what a cage is. Probably not a good idea for you to be using cages right now. On the off chance you do actually have to use a program outside of Substance Painter, or you work at a studio that doesn't have the license for it, you may want to learn what a cage is, just so you can have your own man-made envelope to control things with. Preferably, I like to bump up my settings just a bit by adding a 5 at the end of there. Just a little extra oomph with our envelopes. Anything higher than this is crazy, okay? Because right now I actually just increased my I just increased my envelope 50%. All right, that's pretty crazy. If this is set to point 0.1, that's 10 times larger than what you were doing. Your envelopes is far beyond what the model can even comprehend. Okay, so this setting right here is perfectly fine. All right, we're not projecting that far off. And if you're using floating geometry, make sure that that stuff is nice and shallow so that your envelope can capture that information. If you're making things too large, you may just want to reconsider fixing your model instead of baking such a grand scale. Okay. Relative to bounding box, average normals, ignore backface, all great stuff to have turned on to keep your model very isolated for your baking features. Okay, and kind of explaining some of these things is pretty expensive, so I don't want to waste your time too much on that stuff. But very useful for you. The technique that we're using is the average normals technique. So this is exactly why you would harden your edges and create a UV seam. That's exactly why we're using that, okay? Because that's the workflow that we're using, the average normals workflow. Match. By mesh name, you want to make sure that that's turned on. If you named your stuff correctly, that's stuff you want to have turned on. In my case, I did not name this correctly because it's a small little demo. So that is not named correctly, but do have this turned on by default, okay? Uh, Anti-aliasing. This is an important feature for anti-aliasing your model and your bakes, okay? Eventually, you're going to want to bump this up, but for right now, I want some fast bakes. I just want to get it out of the way. If you want to control how much you have to type inside Maya, if you, for instance, hate the letters GH and W, and you just want to type in HI and LO inside Maya, that's how you control it. And those are the suffixes that it's looking for right there. If you want to type in orange, I don't care what you want to type in. That's what it's going to look for, and that's what it's going to bake. Okay, and you're going to hate your life. Okay. Um, just the first word that came to mind. Sorry. Okay, all my stuff is set. I'm ready to go. Let's bake a mesh and see what happens. Okay. We're focusing in on this stuff, not this stuff. All right, so just keep that in mind. So that is what I got for my projection right there. It's interesting, right? It's magic, right? Here's my geometry. Okay, so you see what happened there. It took those two faces and tried to blend it together like one face. Pretty nifty, right? But right now, you're pretty low resolution, but I'm getting the effects that I want. So I'm pleased with my service, and I'm going to keep going with that service. I'm going to bump this up to 2048 and see what we're getting from that. Interesting. Okay, I'm not seeing any defects on my model right now. This is just the area I'm focusing on. Give yourself a good little inspection to see how the whole model's doing. Okay, good. Let's try some anti-aliasing. Bump this up to 2 by 2. Okay, increasing the time there, but softening things out now a little bit, right? It found those circular shapes and softened it out for me. Okay, so this is an important feature that you want to make sure you have turned on. 4 by 4 maximum or minimum, I would say, with your bakes. Okay, going to 8 by 8 is going to be pretty crazy for you. Okay, so if you're only rocking the laptop, just be ready to with a fire extinguisher. Okay. So now that I have myself set up pretty good with my 2048, I'm going to neglect my normal map for right now, turn that off, and let's just bake the AO map now. Coming down to 1024 again. Take this down. Let's see if we can get a quick little AO map. Hello, little AO map. How you doing? All right. So if I press B, I can actually look at my baked maps. That's my normal. Don't have that. Don't have that. AO. There's my AO map. Cool. Blah, 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 blah. Pressing M goes back to material. If I press C, it goes to my channels. But I have no... but I have no layers right now. So the only thing it's showing is my actual normal map, right? Okay. Let's say, for instance, something is not working correctly, and I have some errors in my bakes, okay? Let's say, for instance, I have a face over here that's really making some nasty stuff, and I do not want that to receive any normal map information at all, okay? This is how you would want to mask that information off inside Substance Painter, okay? What you're going to have to do, let me pull this stuff down. I don't really need all that information in there for right now. But this is all we're using right now is normal map and AO map. There's no reason to bake anything else. You can bump your AO map up a little bit more, but I'm just gonna save some time here to fix that stuff for right now. Normal mixing is set up to combine, so if I make some new layers, this is what I want to do is actually use fill layers with masks. Just add a black mask in there. If I want to occlude normal map information, what I'm actually going to do, okay, now I need this information. I'm going to delete everything besides my normal channel. I'm going to grab my texture that came out. Where's my textures? There it is. This is my normal map for this feature. Pull my normal map in there. Now my normal map is part of a fill layer in normals. And what I'm going to do is change my texture settings to, instead of combining normals, to replacing them. All right. Now right now I am selected to, you see that it's not working, but it's because I have a black mask, right? So actually let's change this to a white mask. It's probably better to kind of work backwards the other way than it is forwards, right? You see that's working. Add a white mask. Well, what happened? Add white mask. Oh, I'm in projection. Sorry. Okay. It's all becoming more clear to me. Okay, so now I have my normal map in this layer specifically. It's not part of my textures anymore. It's actually a layer. So now I can use this feature right now. Come over to my polygon selection tool. I'm just going to grab faces right now. So now I can mask off my face. Oh, I need to put it in black. There. So now I've masked off that face because I didn't want this face to bake on. So now I have that masked off. If I want to undo that, and maybe let's say for instance that this face is just too messy, I'm now removing normal map information from my model that's error based. Okay. You can also do this with a brush tool, right? If you want to brush some stuff off, make it nice and pretty. I'm white again. Sorry. I'm brushing out my normals, and now that is receiving no normal map information from my bake map. Here's a clue for you to keep you kind of motivated about normal maps and baking. Not everything has to be baked with normal maps and AO maps, okay? If your chain link looks beautiful in soft mode, there's no features to be baked on there, why bake something? Okay? Why waste your time trying to fix that bake? The AO bake may be nice, but your normal maps are not doing anything, okay? Because it's just going to be a soft on soft thing, all right? So, not everything has to be baked. So if you are getting baking errors on something, this is how you can actually occlude that. So if I grab my stuff right here, I can actually come over here to UV selection in my 2D view, and I can quite simply just mask off a whole UV shell at a time. And I can actually get some really fast occlusions for that. The same thing works for AO maps as well. So you can do UV selection, grab whole shells, all that good stuff. The same thing applies to AO. However, by default, you do not have an AO channel inside Substance Painter, so you will have to add a channel, ambient occlusion, and now I have a new layer. If you want to work on these together, you can. If your AOs and normals were equally messed up and they're in the same areas, then you can mask both of those at the same time by putting your AO map in there. Now my AO is essentially masked out. Let me make sure my AO texture is set up correctly here too, though. You'll see here ambient occlusion multiply or replace. So with replace, I'm doing the same thing that I'm doing with my normals, is I'm actually replacing my AO map with a layer, and now I'm using fill layers to mask my stuff off like that. Okay, so that's how you would want to mask things off like that. Something I left out, and I apologize for this, is ambient occlusion actually has its own. It actually has its own self occlusion matched by mesh name. Okay. By default, you do not want this turned off, okay? Because AO has to bake onto separate shapes, right? You want those shapes to be baking on correctly because it's creating shadows in areas that you want shadows to be, okay? That's actually an important thing to have. However, if you are getting some really bad bakes from certain areas, you may want to consider doing a separate bake that is only same mesh name. So if I do another bake that does that only same mesh name feature, I can actually now, I can make a fill node that's doing that same thing. Let's just turn on my AO and plug in that new AO map. And now I can mask off my new AO map over my old AO map that has all the errors to it. Okay, so you can kind of pull those maps together and pick and choose from which bake you actually like better. Okay, because it's still using the same information here. You plug that texture in. Is it the same one, or you may have to make an extra one actually, because it looks like it might be the same one. But you should try to maybe export this map or just rename it. Maybe you can rename it. I don't know. Export the resource, put it back in as a different name, and maybe it won't override itself like that. But you can essentially, pick and choose from what bakes you want to get out of this thing. Cool. So that's it for baking. We're going to actually work on exporting now because now we're going to be exporting directly to Sketchfab. Okay. We, like I said before, Substance Painter will alter your maps and your tangents and binormals for whatever program you're going into. So you want to make sure you export directly to Sketchfab. That way Substance Painter knows that it's going into Sketchfab and it makes it look good for Sketchfab specifically. All right. So we are going to change our configuration here all the way up at the top to Sketchfab. You see what maps we're getting out of this. Remember how I said that 2048 document size is right now by default setting that resolution to that. You want to eventually be exporting and baking out at 4K resolution. Obviously I didn't bake out, but try to bake out at 4K resolution if you can. Sorry. But right now I'm only at 2048. I'm going to bump this down just to 1024 just to make this faster, okay? But we're going to export this map directly to Sketchfab, hit export, bravissimo. I'm loaded in, my account is plugged in. If you're not plugged in, just enter your email address and password for Sketchfab, and then you'll be plugged in. I have a blank slate project right here, but what we want to keep reloading the same project, right? We want to bake and reload onto the project that's already there. So instead of hitting publish, we're going to hit update existing model. And right now, it gives me a list of all my models on Sketchfab because it's already plugged in. So I can grab my asset. Where's my vintage drill game res? There we go. And it just plugged all my information in there. It has my model number. It's all ready to go. And when I hit upload, it will replace my model and throw my textures into the right place for me. It may dislocate your camera and throw that off a little bit, but if you click on the background, if you just double click on the background, it'll recenter your model and you can set up that camera again. But your lighting and all your textures and everything that you had previously will be saved in place there, okay? And that pretty much covers the rest of this lecture for the Milestone 2 high-res to game-res baking. Okay, so just make sure you UV that stuff out. Do some test bakes. Like, once again, this should not be a last-minute thing that you do because it's going to take some trial and error. Okay, if you are just not getting the right bakes that you need to, there is actually some extra information on fixing some things on your normal maps on the resources and development page inside Photoshop itself. But this is not something we want to rely on. Okay, if you work on this kind of workflow specifically, then you have to make these fixes every single time you do that. We would rather you try to focus on getting the perfect bake that you can and only using this as a last minute resort. Okay, so if you want to find that lecture, it is actually on the FSO page in the resources development for the map correction techniques inside Photoshop. Okay. With that said, though, that's the rest of this lecture, and let me know if you have any questions, and please make sure you look down at the bottom of the page for annotations that may be made to this lecture. Thank you very much.